Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Since following your work and hearing you speak, I'm really intrigued to see where this conversation goes today.
I'm very excited. Thank you for having me, Mark.
So, as you are aware, we jump straight in with, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
I love this question, and I've been thinking about it since you first emailed me. I think one of the questions I find myself exploring is, how can I live in a way that's closer to my values? How can I inch closer over time to the things I say matter most to me, and the way of living I say matters most to me? I think that question has been following me around for quite some time, and I always try to respect the questions that follow me around.
What a delightfully honest question this is, or interpretation of it, I sense. Can you give me a sense of how that has evolved for you, just as you talk about the moving towards it?
How the question itself has evolved for me? Is that what you're wondering?
Just in terms of the moving closer to it, and just how that relationship has evolved.
I guess I would say that earlier in my life, I would have assumed that I was living inside my values. And I would have been and was surprised when somebody would point out that maybe I wasn't doing that maybe I was claiming one thing and doing another thing. And of course, I read so much about this disjuncture to understand that it's like this is the regular experience of life if you're attentive to it. And so instead of being surprised by feedback about this topic, I started to get kind of voracious for feedback about this topic, and hunt down those places where I could approach my values more closely. And that means you have to always be questioning, is this disjuncture because I really need to get closer, or is it because I actually don't really believe in that value, or that value trades off against a different value that's more important to me? And so even that work has been just incredibly interesting and feels like it's the work of a lifetime. I don't think I'll arrive anywhere ever.
Did you have to develop that capacity to accept that perhaps you might not be where you think you are with your values? Like, was the process of getting feedback, it sounds like there's a lovely openness here. Was there something to do to open that space up, or how would you describe that?
Oh yeah, that's nasty work, right? Like that. That's a highly unpleasant experience. Because we all want to believe that we live in accordance with our values, right? I think that's everybody's fondest hope. And really looking at the ways that's not possible. And I tell you that, first there was feedback, and then there's like self-discovery, where I remember one very grim day where I realized that even when I was living in what I would think to myself was like strict and firm adherence to some of my values, that those values themselves had terrible shadows, that firm adherence turned out to be problematic as opposed to somehow life-giving. And that as I looked at each of the values, I had been trying to get closer to a kind of rigid adherence to these values. Each of them was one side of a polarity, and a rigid adherence to one of them meant that I was completely neglecting the other side of the polarity and leaving the whole system weak. And then I thought, I really, in that moment, I thought, I'm just going to go to bed. Like, I can't even cope with this idea. This idea is so dismaying. Like, maybe there's nothing to be done. I need a nap. That was my, like, throwing up my hands and thinking words I probably shouldn't say on a podcast. But this was
Please do.
I mean, it really was like, oh, well, fuck the whole enterprise was basically the thing that happened for me.
Yeah.
And then I was lost for some time. And then the enterprise became actually kind of delicious. Like, oh, so there's nothing straightforward about this. We went and phrased, with a couple of friends, I started this firm called Cultivating Leadership, and it's been an incredible practice ground for me as that has grown. And around this time, we went back and recast all of our firm values as polarities. We believe in this and this, this and this. Now, one of the things I always joke is brevity doesn't make that list. And so there are like a billion values and polarities that we have. But actually, the dance is super interesting. And since it can't be mastered, it also can't, there's no shame in not mastering the dance because it's unmasterable. And that makes the whole enterprise, for me, much more pleasant and satisfying.
Wow, that's a hell of a realization to come to, I sense. And but I think for anyone listening too, I think that's a deeply profound realization to take into account. What you're saying there reminded me of a time where I made honesty the be all and end all, and I even kept the tally marks of when I was telling a lie, an embellishment, or distorting truth. And I remember then I came to a relationship where I could lose my humanity in how I was speaking to people, but holding on to my honesty.
Yeah.
And that kind of went under my radar for a little bit of time. And I was even sharing stories of sharing my honesty or truth, completely oblivious to perhaps even how obnoxious I was to some people, while not intending to be, if you get me. But when you mentioned that shadow side of a value, could you give me maybe even an example of just maybe a shadow of a value that maybe even surprised you, I guess?
Yeah. So the two that got me most in the gut were generosity and curiosity. And I would have said that they really have been North Stars for me. These two North Stars, maybe they're needed better metaphor. But I follow them. They're my guides. And I can't always stay with them, of course, but they really mattered to me. And then I realized that generosity, if you lean into only that, then actually you don't defend your boundaries very well. You outsource a lot of the work of boundary defining to other people. And that generosity can be kind of a disabling function because people can receive it in a way that says, here, have mine. I'm not sure you can get one yourself. which was, of course, jeepers, the farthest thing from my thoughts. Just as hurting people is the farthest thing from your honesty thoughts. And yet. And curiosity meant that I was not standing for things. I was like a waving octopus slipping away, chasing after this curiosity or that curiosity. And I wasn't standing in a place that said, no, this is known. I'm sure about this. I'm sure that this is the way to go. I was using it in some way as a blind to escape responsibility or power, or the responsibility that comes with knowing a thing. But when I realized that those two, like these most treasured values, also cast these shadows, that was a big day. I remember exactly where I was on that day, where I was sitting and how it felt, and the heading to bed afterwards, middle of the day. And I thought, nothing can be born now. I can't do anything with this. This is horrible. I need to start again.
Just out of interest, where were you when you made that realization?
I was in Paikakariki, my home in Paikakariki, New Zealand, which is where I was living at that time, sitting at a desk that looked out to the Tasman Sea. And I remember looking at the Tasman Sea and thinking, you exist, but I don't know about me and what I stand for. I remember that so vividly. Yes, the ocean is real.
These lines of inquiries aren't always for the faint-hearted, I sense.
Indeed.
Yeah. Just when you mentioned, the idea of feeling lost but not having shame, could you describe perhaps how that came to be for you? Like, if there are any kind of inklings you sense that moved you in that direction?
I don't know, maybe this is going to expose something new I need to look at, but I have, almost certainly this conversation will expose new things for me to look at. I have, when I think to myself, oh, this is part of the human condition. Oh, here we are together. This is what it means to be human. Oh, then there's a piece of me that says, well, how arrogant is it for me to not participate in it in a human way? Who do you think you are? And so for me, that just lets my whole nervous system down. Oh, this battle with how are we in relationship to our values, I don't believe that there are people who aren't doing that. Or if there are, maybe it's a very small handful of people. I believe that most of us have some kind of relationship to this idea. And so it didn't feel like it was mine. It felt like it was ours. And when it feels like it's ours, for me, there's so much less shame in it, right? Then it's just oh, that's ours. That's part of being us.
I just think that's a delightful sentiment. I really have I've only, I think, heard that shared a couple of times by people, and each time I hear it, it just gives me a kind of an opening in my heart or a relaxation, to be honest, because I think so much of our human suffering, while of course we'll still get caught, even with this realization, until this realization maybe is more felt again. But I think there's such relief in that.
I mean, it's our connectedness to each other that does it, right? It's our willingness to say, hey, this is us. We're in the same boat together. Then suddenly everything's about how are you doing it? Right? Like, how do you do it? Because I could use to learn from how you're doing it. And I could tell you some of the ways I'm doing it. This is why I love this podcast and this question. Who knows what a good life is, right?
Yeah.
Each of us has one tiny piece of the puzzle. And there are an infinite number of puzzle pieces. And so sharing them around has to be better than not sharing them around. It just it just has to be better.
You know, your questions around the shadow in curiosity most certainly will be giving me something to reflect on after we conclude this conversation. But just from your perspective, really intrigued as to what that understanding of a potential shadow to that curiosity, perhaps what that led to for you.
I think for me, it led to a willingness to take more stands, to not take stands as if they're forever true. I think I'm still afraid of that idea. I'm not at all drawn to a notion that says this is now and forevermore the best way. But I can say, like, in this moment, the thing that I believe is true is this thing. And while you ask any of my friends or I happen to live in an intentional community with a bunch of friends. You ask any of my friends here, they will definitely tell you I don't come out as certain all that often. I'm still not close friends with certainty. But I have more access to it than I ever had before. And I have more access to the power of, I don't know, putting a stake down and saying, I believe in this moment. That it's a very motivating thing for people who follow a leader to here's a stake.
Can you give me an example, perhaps, of something that occurred within a kind of a time frame that showed that was now being something that you had brought into living in your own life?
Yeah, so I can give you an example. The one that pops into my mind is I write books, and I decided before my last book. My most recent book has been a second edition of my first book. So if we don't count that one, the last book I wrote from scratch was with my friend Carolyn, and it's called Unleash Your Complexity Genius. And there's a chapter in that book about love. And I had decided a few years ago that I was going to take a stand for love. That love was an appropriate word to use with clients, that love was an appropriate word to use in a business context, that instead of shying away from that word and going to kind of softer forms like connection or things that felt a little bit more bloodless to me, I was going to go with like the full-throated cry and then see if I could expand what that word meant for people instead of avoiding the use of that word. This was what I decided. And so that's a piece of this, like, I'm not going to be tentative about it. I'm going to actually run at it, and I'm going to make a public stand for it. And my editor, the editor of that book, got back to me and said, "Oh, I love the book. It's awesome. It really makes good sense to me. But that last chapter, that love chapter, that does not belong in a business book." I think that if you just replace the word love with the word connection, it would be much more appropriate, and readers would be fine with it. But as love, if you're looking to cut anything, I think you could cut that whole chapter. And I said, no, I won't do it. Like, I won't publish the book at all without that chapter. And that's the word I'm going to use. That's the word I meant. And that's the word I'm going to use. And so it's this kind of place. Now, in 5 years, am I going to think that I maybe did more harm than good by, like, really pushing this rock uphill? I don't know. I'm open to that possibility. I'm totally open to the possibility that I'm wrong in my certainty. But right now, I'm I I'm standing. I'm standing in it.
What was it like to make that stand?
It was actually fun as hell. It was kind of delicious. It was like, I checked myself, and now that I understand that, for me, I'm not saying I'm sure I'm going to be right about this forever. That there's a difference between I'm I believe this is the truth about the world and it's not up for reconsideration. And I am still I I don't have those marks in my life. Those things actually make me nervous. They make me nervous. Should I feel that way, or should other people feel that way? That makes me a little bit nervous. Sometimes extraordinarily nervous. But the idea that I can be sure about something now and also reserve the right to learn something new about it, or to have the context change such that, if that word got co-opted by people who meant it in a really different way, and that's what it came to stand for, and I couldn't reclaim what I meant inside that word, I would drop the word. So I don't know, maybe that's still not real certainty. Maybe I haven't gotten as close as I think I have. But right now, that feels like a stance I actually enjoy finding those places. There aren't a huge number of them, but when I find them, it's like being swimming and finding a rock that you can climb out of the water onto and lie on and feel the sun on your back. It's very pleasant. I now enjoy the, like, hunt for the rocks.
That's a really delightful metaphor, because I think sometimes, even in my own path, I've wished for dry land, and a friend of mine who's a film director told me, or maybe do you just have to get used to being at sea? And I think that there's something what you've just said there that probably dovetails it all, or ties it together more nicely for me. Just and to me, I think there sounds like a great maturity to a certainty for now, and an openness still within the certainty. Maybe I'm trying to give you a cop out for my own cop outs, but I think that sounds very mature to me in some ways, like it's wise. Just from your perspective, that idea of truth, and perhaps a time scale to that truth, or remaining true. Do you know how that might you know how that developed?
Uh, it just seems like the core force of the world is change. And if you just look at history, you just see all these things that people thought were true for so long just change. I have this funny, like, side set of investigations about the nature of time, which don't belong anywhere in any of my work in any way. But, like, if a new book comes out on the nature of time, I'll read it, and I read about, like, these weird And I don't understand physics or any of these things that one would need to understand to really make sense of the nature of time. But I just enjoy this thought about the nature of time. Many years ago, I read a book called Einstein's Dreams, which is all about the nature of time. And if you haven't read it, it's just such a spectacular book. Everybody should just go buy this old and beautiful book that has all these like different metaphors for the nature of time. So I have this kind of like side set of questions. Like, what if all of our sense making around the nature of time dissolves? Right? We find that the nature of time is something like believing we live on a flat earth. It feels that way. You know, the fact that it's linear and the fact that it's unidirectional and seems to be experienced by all of us in generally the same linear unidirectional way. What if it's all not true? And somehow being like in love with a question about that helps me know that everything is at least a little bit up for grabs.
I've read I think it's The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli, and there's a series of books that share this similar curiosity
So
as you
good,
do,
right? I
and
love that book.
I think there's a stunning liberation in reading that, and oddly, I would say I get some of the kind of bodily experiences I get from reading what I consider to be a genuinely great spiritual book. Some books on physics and time evoke a similar bodily experience in me, whether I, mentally fully grasp what they're talking about or not.
I have exactly that same experience. And this is why I love them. And they also just, like a really great uh, question about, the everything. Reading these books about like what's the nature of reality and how far are we from understanding the true nature of reality. I just, maybe if I had it to do again, I would be a conceptual physicist. Although my grades in my science classes would not look like that's an encouraging direction. But that just this question about what is the nature of everything is just such a good question.
Just when you mentioned the nature of reality, and to go back to what you were discovering or standing for in the sense of love in even in a business book, I'm really fascinated by how how much we seem not to believe in love these days in ways, and yet how fundamental it seems to how we all perceive and experience life. Just if you wouldn't mind just sharing some of the ideas, I guess, that you were bringing forth in the chapter, and also just the significance for you as to why it needed to be named as love and not connection or some adjacent word.
I think you and I are just aligned on this, right? I think we mostly know that that when we come to some like something that really pushes us up against the border of our mortality, right? An illness, the death of a loved one, an accident that shatters various other things. We Nobody says, "Damn, I wish I had like a fancier pair of shoes," right? Like if only I had, more money in my bank account. Like nobody. Now there are real world issues that sometimes make good shoes and money in the bank account very connected to health and well-being. I understand. And what we seem to always care the most about is this question of how strong are my relationships, how much do I feel cherished? How much am I able to cherish others? And every study points to studies that didn't go anywhere near looking for this. These longitudinal studies, short-term studies, studies about cancer and survival, studies about material success, studies about blood pressure, all of them point to these questions of what is the connective, human connective tissue in your life. And that's love, right? That's what we're talking about. And when we call it something else, one of the things that Carolyn and I write about in this Complexity Genius book is that all of the things we call geniuses, the ways we are able to better handle complexity, the things in our lives that help us be better able to handle complexity, all of them arise naturally. Like all of them are things that from either regularly, like breathing arises naturally. It always happens for us. Or like love, these things happen, they arise in our lives. And then the complexity question is, can we go and make them, right? Can we create the conditions for them to arise? Can we actually focus on our breath and breathing in a particular way that changes our nervous system? Not so that it happens to us, but so that we happen to it in a way. And, we have this idea of falling in love. And then Bill Torbert and Hilary Bradbury in their fabulous book posit this question of rising to love. Right? Mm. Falling in love happens to you. Rising to love is a choice. And how do we make that choice over and over and over again? How do we have a commitment to making that choice? That we can do on purpose. And does it always work? And is it always fun? And, no, nothing always works. Nothing's always fun. Of course you put yourself at risk there. Life is always at risk. My friend Keith says nobody ever made it through alive yet. Like this is the thing. And so for me, really pushing the boundaries to say, I think that our conceptualization of love is too narrow. This thing we fall into, this thing that is romantic, this thing that is rare. I believe it's this thing that is universal, this thing that is our birthright, this thing that is possible in way, way greater amounts than we give it credit for, and we give ourselves credit for.
This definitely resonates a lot, and I'm just curious from your perspective, like what have you learned almost in that significance of rising to love and it being far more universal?
I mean, I love people, so I have an orientation to that. I lead this firm called Cultivating Leadership, and one of our commitments is to friendship, to real relationships that cross out of some kind of like work boundary and into deep and abiding care. We started this intentional community about almost 6 years ago now, 5 years, some number of years ago now. And a bunch of us live together and try to negotiate. Living together, even for a couple of people, isn't that easy. There are 14 of us that own this place. And how do we manage all of that? So I think if you see your life as a practice for rising to this, love makes demands on us to grow, to become more flexible, to become more clear, to become more brave, to become more open, all the things, and that's a pretty great practice ground. I mean, people pay a lot of money for workshops that help them do those things. You could just have it all the time, right? Like life could be that workshop.
I think I love the idea too of it being this narrow concept of love that we have. And, I'm sure there was a point in time in my life I thought love is, my immediate family. Now, in that same perspective, I'd have said whoever was going to be a wife or a child or something would fall into that, and maybe a handful of good friends or close aunties. What I'm kind of finding remarkable about life is at this point, potentially even feeling that in a moment of connection with a stranger, um, even in a look that we could share on the street. I think even what I found it most surprising was feeling it with a middle-aged American man on a Zoom call that I'd never spoke with before. I think there's something you're talking about there that when we cease to kind of limit its potentiality or where it can occur, it's actually so much more easy to identify than what we previously would have considered.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a bar lowering, right? I think it's like an expansion into a set of
Totally.
possibilities that were probably there before, but that our conceptualization closed off from us. Because I have the same experience, that it's just more available in these momentary ways than I would have expected. And it's just delightful, right? It's like I'm not talking about like getting your steps in, right? Or eating things that are good for you but don't taste good. I'm talking about the thing we long for the most, really.
There's something kind of poignant, I sense, to the availability of it and the simultaneous longing. Um, just because you've mentioned it a couple of times, very intrigued to know what prompted the intentional living community.
Yeah, I think it's quite a common story, right? COVID made us think about our lives in a different way. I don't know if your life changed materially during COVID, but my life changed materially during COVID. As I thought that, oh, this life I have, which was, working for me to a large measure, is really relies on travel to like put all the pieces together, relies on airplanes and moving. And this question of like what happens if that becomes less available. And by the way, you always knew that wasn't great from a carbon perspective. There's a value flying in carbon. Um, this is a value I've not. I patch with a little bit of sellotape, but I have not actually. I've not done particularly well in this one at all. Um, but one of the choices was maybe a bunch of us could buy a place together, and then we would practice a new way of living, and we would see whether the ideas we have that we bring into organizations actually work to bring into a house where you have to make decisions about, like which renovation project do you spend your small number of dollars on, and what color should the kitchen cabinets be. Um, and that's been just a super interesting ride, like incredibly developmental and also incredibly joyful, not all the time, but a lot of the time.
I have I have a friend and actually a former guest of the show who became a friend that she shared with me this process in a place outside of Brandenburg here in Germany. Really curious as to what some of the challenges that have arisen that may have surprised you.
Maybe, I mean, ironically, one of the things that surprised me is that there are fewer challenges than I expected. Um, I must have expected like just a disaster, because I keep noticing like whatever challenge arises, I think, oh, that's better than it could have been, Um, I I was noticing in the kitchen yesterday. The kitchen is the site of many challenges. Um, the 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 way we disagree about how to load a dishwasher and what sort of object is used for wiping down the counters, and whether that's the same of as or different from the sort of object that's used for doing dishes. This is a I had no idea there were this many perspectives in the world about these things. And I certainly had no idea that I might care about any of them. Like, I would not have known. And I was noticing in the kitchen the other day, I find myself like fiercely sure that this approach to loading the dishwasher is better than that approach to loading the dishwasher. And like I have some skin in that game. This is really different from the like powerful form of clarity, temporary certainty that allows you to sun yourself on a rock in the uncertainty ocean. This is like this bizarro thing that kind of smacks me about the head and makes me think other people are misbehaving when they just have a different way of doing things. So that's been really interesting to just watch that come up in me. I would have thought I didn't have so many of those attachments, not because I'm like some like profoundly highly realized person, but just because I, I I don't find it in me to care about a lot of these things. Like you might even call me like careless about some of these features. Um, so that's been surprising.
You know, when you mentioned that, it really makes me think of moments where something happens with our nearly 3-year-old daughter, and I think of some way in which that specific circumstance could have been avoided. And then I almost tried to make it sound like there was a certainty to apply to a situation because it makes me feel a little bit better. You just get me to reflect on this. Um, Maybe I owe another apology to my wife after, but you know what I mean. Like there's something very strange about it. Like it's especially in a life or in a world where I sense that perhaps I'm letting go of certainty in other ways, or that time may not be the way we really perceive it. And yet, there was really a certainty to avoid an innocuous occurrence with a toddler. You know.
I, I I think it's such a great thing to notice, right? Just that these things that we hold on to as ways of ultimately, I think, controlling our lives, uh, and and what it's like to notice that a lot of that control is, somewhat ridiculous, right? Not always possible, not always preferable, and very often untrue. And yet we we can put our nails in it and hang on to it. And it's also just so easy to make somebody else wrong. That's so much harder to do in community. When three people have the same opinion and you have a different opinion, suddenly you know, maybe you're the off base one about what we should use to wipe down the counters. Like maybe you need to change on this one. So like all the myriad places where, I probably need to change on that one.
Just given how you opened the conversation, even around, how do I live in a way that's closer to values? I was just very intrigued about the idea of doing that within a larger immediate community, and maybe even some of the process towards moving to collective values and the relationship between that and your own personal values.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. One of my values is about connection and about sharing power and um, about being in webs with each other on purpose and rising to love. Well, you can get a little bit closer to that if you buy a house with a bunch of other people, and then you have to make collective decisions together, and you have to eat dinner together, and uh, that this then becomes the form of your life. That for me is like getting a little closer to this value I have around really centering love and community in my life. So, you know, I'm not there, but it's an intentional decision that kind of forces that kind of closeness. And it the thing about all these decisions is that they're shockingly confronting, in fact. You think, oh, I'm getting closer to my values, everything is going to be so fun now. Like, no, you were far from that value on purpose, right? That was a protective mechanism. That distance was protective. And talking about it is very, pleasant and safe. And then doing it is harder. It's harder. We had this notion at Cultivating Leadership that we didn't want to accumulate and pool wealth in a way that felt like it was not inside our values around money, generosity, sharing, stuff like that. And we also didn't want to create kind of weird conditions where some people had access to things and other people didn't. We had a like very democratic hopes and complexity friendly hopes for what organizational form we could create. And then it turned out Cultivating Leadership was starting to be worth some money. And there were only 4 of us who actually ever owned the thing. We didn't act like owners particularly, but we signed the paper and we were the ones who kind of bailed the thing out when it was in financial trouble. And, we did all those kinds of things. And then, and we were on the leadership team. And then as it got to be worth more money, we saw that having that value in the hands of the 4 of us was problematic from a values perspective, as well as for other kind of logistical reasons. And so we made a small foundation. We gave the firm to that small foundation. And the act of doing that's very aligned with my values. Like, it's exactly, if I saw somebody else do that, I'd be like, oh, that's very admirable. And the doing it was very hard. Like, it probably took me 2 years to get over that we had done that thing. And I would lie awake at night and I'd think, was that the stupidest thing I ever did in my life? Like, I've built this thing up, and now that it's worth money, my kids were like, did you just give away our inheritance? And I thought, did I just really screw up my kids? Like, and so it's not that these things are like so joyful as they happen, they are revisited and relearned from, and I think they lead to joy. But there's it's not a straight line.
That's I think that's just such a great example, though, of we read about these things a lot, right? And we can talk about values, and maybe the flat stories do tell the general truth of it, but it doesn't reveal the humanity within it, which is just a word you've used a couple of times, which is just delicious at times, right?
It is, that's the everyday privilege of being alive, right? Here we are in this glorious and terrifying moment in human history, and we're here. We're in the moment, and that's an amazing coincidence. It almost didn't happen that any of us were here in this moment, and so I try to stay aware about that. That is where the gold is.
It's also interesting, I think, that there's in ways there's nowhere else to be as well.
Right.
Like, and you use the word confronting a couple of times as well. Like that's bloody confronting, but there's simultaneously something relieving in that in some way.
For me, it's when I give up, which doesn't happen every day, but when I have the presence to give up my many forms of defenses against this very idea, it all feels so relaxing. Like, even if I'm busy, it's very relaxing, because what else is there, right? Like, what else is there except, as you say, there's this moment, there's us each trying to do our best in our own way, and that's what we have. That's everything we have
Yeah.
from moment to moment.
Just given where we started around the sense of how do I get closer to my values? How do I realize when I'm not there? You mentioned the sense of getting feedback and hunting things down, and so there's a real rigor to it, but then there's also this deeply human realization that, oh, this struggle that I'm facing, it's ours, it's not mine to take. And there can be an openness within that rigor of realizing that there's values that are competing, that realizing that this is a dance that is never mastered. Even the significance of shadows within these values as well, and the significance then of acting upon those realizations, like, i.e., with the example of putting love into the chapter and standing for that, even allowing for its temporary nature, but this total joy, it seems, as well. And not only the ideas of rising to love, but just even the temporary nature of things, and even questioning perhaps at times our perspectives on reality with regards to time and things of that nature. And as you've made abundantly clear, the continued movement towards living values, even if it makes you and your children wonder about your own actions and what have you done. I'm really looking forward to hearing your response, Jennifer, to the question of what is a good life for you.
Yeah, I think this is a good life, right? For me, maybe it's the same answer. I think it's the um, being here, and and really investigating what matters most, and then really trying to be in company with what matters most, and not in the rigid way I would have tackled that. I did tackle that, 20 years ago, but in a way that feels more, I don't know, more aligned to what nature tells us about growing and shedding and trying again. And, I live in the French countryside now. I have crafted a life for myself out of the extraordinary privilege of being alive right now, of having been born by mistake to my parents in this age, and being good at the things I happen to be good at. I have this incredible privilege to make a lot of choices about how to live, and to then try to bring these choices closer to what matters most to me. And I think that's a discipline, and I think it is a discipline for that everybody can exercise some, but I have had the great privilege to be able to exercise it quite a lot. And geez, I have the best life. I just have. I live with my friends. I have, dinner with people I love every night. I have extraordinary grown children that I treasure. I have a life filled with love. I do work that I would do for free, and still people pay me to do it. With people I really admire who are trying to make a difference in the world. I mean, it's just amazing. It's well beyond anything I could have imagined. And a lot of the choices I've made have been really scary along the way. And I don't consider myself a particularly brave person. And so facing into these scary things as a somewhat wimpy and anxious person has been, tough. And there are a lot of fruits to it. There's a lot of a lot in this present moment that if I started listing the things that I was grateful for, it would take a long time too long.
Jennifer, well, I've most certainly had the use word privilege. I've had the privilege of speaking with you today. And I must say, I don't think I've ever heard somebody both articulate both the nuance and significance of values, but more significantly, I sense give real life lived experiences of living that practice as profoundly as you have today. So I'm sure when I listen back to this, there will be even more for me to take from this conversation. And so just look, thank you so much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast.
Thank you so much for inventing this podcast and being with it in these ways. This is, it's been a real privilege to have this conversation with you. Thank you.